The movie begins with a dark-skinned woman called Holly who's staring at herself in the mirror, trying to find a certain spot on her head. When she locates it, she inserts a small metal rod connected to a device into her skull. She moves the wheel on the small machine around, starting to smile, and then immediately cries as if it was controlling her emotions. Once she was done with the check, she wipes off the tear on her face and heads out. As she comes down the elevator and stands in front of the reception desk, a woman hurries out from a different room and calls her inside. Holly and a couple of other girls wearing the same uniform enter an elevator and are taken up to a large room where a classy party was taking place. Grabbing a knife from the utensils set by the door, Holly heads up to a chubby man with gray hair and stabs him in the neck. As the crowd screams and runs away, Holly continues her stabbing, making sure that he was dead. She then touches the pool of blood on the ground as if she was mesmerized. Holly then gets up and grabs the gun that she had brought with her in her bag, and she attempts to shoot herself in the head, but struggles with the action, so she waits until the police who inevitably come to arrest her arrive and point the gun toward them. In self-defense, the police open fire, putting her down before she could shoot one bullet. Somewhere completely different, a woman awakens with a gasp after a machine is removed from her face. As she struggles to control her breathing, she couldn't help but puke out everything that she ate the day before. The man in the room confirms that the link that they had was severed and that the mission was completed. Tasya, the woman who had just been awakened, is taken to a different room and given a test to check if her memory is fully functional. One by one, she takes out the personal belongings inside the box and explains to the woman making a note of her responses. Once they're done, Girder, Tasya's handler, confirms that she was perfectly fine after her latest mission and asks her if she had anything to tell her. When Tasya confirms that she doesn't, Girder smiles and tells her that their new contact is almost finalized and that she can't have her star performer fall apart. Tasya suggests that she can take some time off because she'd been talking to her ex-husband Michael, who'd suggested that she do so. Girder comments that Tasya wasn't safe to be around her ex and her child, the same thing Tasya had told her a few weeks back. After their discussion, Tasya leaves the building and heads back home to visit her ex-husband and her son, Ira. While Tasya has dinner with her family, Michael, who has no clue what his wife does, asks her how her trip was. She tells him that it was very dull and that she's glad to be back in town. That night, Tasya and her ex-husband share a passionate moment on his bed, but during the act, she starts to remember the violent act of stabbing the man in the neck. The thought arouses Tasya and she starts to give Michael more attention. Later that night, Tasya calls Girder and apologizes for seeming strange the day before and lets her know that she was ready for work. After leaving the voicemail, Michael approaches her and asks her to move back in with him and her son, and while he speaks, all Tasya can see is a huge wound on his neck, gushing blood. After returning to the office, Tasya discusses Girder's retirement and her role being taken over by Tasya. Although Girder has complete confidence in her, she's worried that the thread that connects Tasya to her old life hasn't been severed yet. Girder confirms with Tasya whether she wants to continue with the new assignment, and Tasya agrees. Girder introduces their new target on the projector, the CEO of a major company, John Parse, and his daughter, Ava. The deal was made with Reed and John's stepson, who wanted to inherit the entire company. Tasya would have to possess the mind of Ava's fiancé Colin, a previous drug dealer and user, to get access to the family. Girder explains that the narrative would be that Colin, the unstable lover, feels diminished by the powerful family and starts using more drugs. Ultimately, Colin breaks, killing his fiancé and her father, and then finally himself. For the next few days, Tasya spends her days learning Colin's routine and mannerisms, and once she's sure that she can trick anyone around him, Girder has the team kidnap Colin and prep him for Tasya to take over. Girder reminds Tasya that once she was locked inside the target, she will not be allowed to eject until the mission was complete. The assassination was scheduled to happen in 2 days when the family would be gathered for dinner. The compatibility between Tasia and Colin has been rated for only 3 days, so she only has that amount of time to get the mission done. Once she's received all the information, Tasya preps with the team and then jumps inside Colin's body. Tasya's consciousness melts away from herself and is reconstructed inside the target. When Tasya awakens, she finds herself in Colin's body, sleeping next to Ava. Tasya walks around the house, checking her motor functions in her new body, and after a few minutes of looking at herself in the bathroom mirror, she returns to the bedroom to find Colin's fiancé awake and getting dressed. Tasya tries to imitate Colin as best as she can, but Ava seems to notice that there was something strange about her fiancé. After the awkward morning Tasya had with Ava, she heads to Ava's father, John's company, where Colin works in some minor position. While doing his job, Tasya notices a graphic scene and almost loses control of her host. Then suddenly, she feels a strong abdominal pain followed by dizziness, making her run out of the workstation to the bathroom. While she lays on the bathroom floor, Gerder's voice comes through, asking her why her vitals have suddenly spiked. Tasya explains that it was because she was at the company, unable to speak freely, and assures her that everything was alright. Tasya returns to Ava's place late that night, causing Colin's fiancé to worry, and she even almost called the cops. Tasya calms her down, apologizing for not calling. Inside the house, he finds two of Ava's friends as they were doing some coke, talking about Ava's sadistic father. Rita, a close friend of Colin's, asks why he would want to remain in the data mine, but Ava explains that it was her father's doing. Rita seductively mentions all the graphic images that he's subjected to every day, which makes the other girls very uncomfortable. Later, after all their guests leave, Ava tries to talk to who she thought was her fiancé about his recent change in behavior. Trying to calm her down, Tasya promises that she's fine and that his recent strangeness was from the exhaustion of the job. She tells her that she loves her and sweeps her into a night of passion. In the morning, Tasya reaches out to her handler and does her daily report. Gerder sounds worried because Tasya's analysis came up inconclusive, but Tasya calms her down, telling her that the dinner party was that night and that she would be out of the host in 24 hours. That evening, Tasya and Ava attend John's dinner party along with dozens of invitees. Before the celebration starts, John gives a speech to his guests and toasts his company. Ava gives Tasya confidence to meet her father, telling him that her father is a horrible man and that he shouldn't be afraid of him. When they go to where John was sitting to greet him, the narcissistic man belittles Ava's boyfriend by telling his friend sitting next to him that he was the one that found Colin a job and hoped it wasn't beyond his skill set. After the brief conversation, the couple walk away from John, leaving him to enjoy his party. A few minutes later, Tasya gets an order to get into an altercation with John, making a scene that would cover up the murder for when she returns later to finish the job. Acting like she was drunk, Tasya approaches John and demands an apology for his earlier comment. And when the man of the house refuses to give Tasya's host the time of the day, she punches one of the men that got between her and John, getting herself thrown out of the party. Walking outside the house until the party was over, Tasya sneaks back into the mansion and finds the father and daughter drinking on the kitchen table. After she sees Ava going upstairs to bed, she approaches John with a gun in hand and places it on the table. John seems careless about the whole matter and gets up to go to bed. Then suddenly, John tries to rush to the gun, which Tasya expected, and manages to duck, hitting him with a steel rod on the head. After continuous battling, Tasya stabs John in the mouth and then the eye before Ava sees her fiancé and screams. Tasya shoots her twice on the back before following her and finishing her off with a shot to the head. Once she had finished the mission, the only thing left to do was get extracted after forcing her host to kill himself. She then puts the gun in her mouth and tries to pull the trigger, but is unable to do so. Then suddenly she loses control of the host, who is now fighting back from within, and he uses a glass to stab his skull where the implant was buried. Back at the institution, Tasya vomits blood from her mouth, her body feeling the sudden rip between her consciousness and the host's. The doctor makes sure that Tasya is stable, but cannot get her to respond as she is still in the host's mind. Tasya sees Colin's actions in a blur, no longer in control of his motor functions. Colin walks on the street, struggling with himself, unable to explain his actions. Since his shirt is covered in blood, Colin avoids the main road and finds himself a change of clothes from the garbage. Finding a bathroom, Colin plucks out the leftover shards in his head, still getting flashbacks of what he had done. After cleaning up, Colin heads to Rita's house and tells her what he did so they could be together. Confused, Rita asks him what he was talking about, but suddenly, Tasya's memory starts to blur in and out of his head and he gets very confused. While she takes care of his bleeding head, he asks her if he could stay at her place for a few days because he's had a fight with his fiancée. Rita kisses him on the lips and agrees to let him stay for 2 days since she's going to Chicago. While Rita takes a shower, the traumatized Colin sits on her couch and struggles with a split consciousness. Disoriented and having constant flashes of murders, Colin takes out the gun out of his pocket and shoots Rita in the head while she showers. Later, Colin hears the door knock and opens it to find his friend Eddie from work, and confused, he asks Eddie how he knew that he was there, and his friend tells him that Rita had called him earlier and told him that he had an accident. Believing the story, Colin goes to the kitchen to get the man a drink, but Eddie shoots him in the back with a flare gun. While Colin was passed out, Eddie Eddie, who was a collaborator for the company Tasya works for, suppresses the host's consciousness temporarily for her to gain control again. When Tasya wakes up, Eddie explains that Girder has sent him to her lifeline. Tasya asks the man to shoot her in the head, but he refuses, telling her that the host itself has to off itself. But before she could regain full control to be able to finish the job, Colin regains control of his body and shoots Eddie. With control of his body, he also gets access to all of Tasya's memories, including her kills, and finds out about her family. Angry by everything Tasya had done to him, Colin decides to visit the house that he had seen in her memory. After accidentally meeting Ira on the road, Colin is convinced that he has found the right house and waits outside until dark. Mustering up the courage, he knocks on the door and asks for Tasya, but Michael tells him that she doesn't live there anymore and tries to close the door. Angry, Colin holds Michael at gunpoint and demands to know where she is and what she has done to him. Knowing that Tasya is still in his head, he tries to convince her to come out by telling her that he's going to kill her ex-husband. Tasya appears in Colin's subconscious and starts pushing him to kill her ex so that she doesn't have any ties to her past. When Colin is distracted, Michael knocks the gun away from his hand and tries to reach for it, but Colin grabs the meat cleaver from the counter and butchers him to death. Tasya, now back in control, makes another attempt to shoot her host, but is still unable to do so. Then suddenly, Ira appears out of nowhere and stabs Tasya's host in the neck, making her react and shoot him. As she looks at her bleeding son, she feels no remorse and repeatedly shoots him, with the last bullet being aimed at his head. Tasya's host then slowly chokes on his own blood and dies. A few minutes later, it's revealed that Girder has entered Ira in an attempt to help Tasya dissociate from her family that was holding her back. When Tasya awakens, she's made to take the unusual test, but she's actually become a lot different now. As she answers all the questions, she has no attachments to the items, and all her feelings of regret have now been wiped out. If you want to watch more creepy horror movie recaps, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment. We'll see you next time. Bye.